Hi, I'm Christy Carson, and today I'm speaking with Deanna Fernie, and I'm conscious of making sure that we have a range of different experiences demonstrated. And I knew Deanna when she was at Royal Holloway, but she's moved from teaching at the higher education level to teaching at the schools level. And again, I think that's a really important transition. And particularly, I wanted her to represent some of the aspects of the challenges that have been there for people who are teaching in this A-level and GCSE, because those are the students I think that are really going to struggle a little bit. So yeah, my question, because as you know, I've worked with digital resources for a long time for performing arts, and I've often encouraged people to think about using online resources, but this wholesale shift has happened rather faster than I expected, and without much in the way of preparation or training in a lot of cases. So did you teach it online at all before the pandemic? Had you ever done it before?
No,
Okay.
never.
And did you get much in the way of training, or was it just learning on the job?
It's learning on the job, really. I think that some teachers in the school have been much more adept at finding their way around the technology. And some teachers I know of were really using the facilities very well. So, for example, on Microsoft, they were using OneNote or Google Classrooms, and I've used that a little bit for posting documents, but I've not done shared classroom discussions online before. And when we started offering the online classes, we were actually discouraged from using video in the school. So what I did at that point was something that my own daughter suggested to me that she liked her teachers to do, and that was to record themselves narrating over PowerPoints. I started doing this and I had an immediate response from students who said, "This is so helpful, I really understand what you're trying to explain to me now, and could you just keep doing this?" So I did. And by and by, the school enabled us to use video as well. So I now do run Hamlet discussions with the class, and although the students typically aren't on video, I am on video so they can see me. And it's really made a difference to the whole experience of learning. And I think the students feel that they're much more in the classroom than they were when it was just audio. Or when it was just work being sent out online for them to complete independently. I think that was very hard for the students not to have a teacher's voice. So even those narrated PowerPoints made a big difference. And one student said to me, "This is the closest I have felt to being in the classroom during lockdown."
Oh, that's great, isn't it? And I think that's the, beginning to be a bit of a theme, is that you understand the value of the teacher's voice, as you say. But there are limitations to the technology, especially if you're prevented from using video. I know I find it very difficult not to have, any feedback from the students. I think as a teacher, you realize how much you get back from the students as well as how much you give out, as it were. So, how have you adapted your work to working online? How have you, what have you had to adjust?
Yes, very good question. As I said earlier, the main aim has been to get the students engaged in the text. And Shakespeare was always going to be quite daunting in that respect. As one student said to me, the language is a real challenge and it can be off-putting. So I knew that would be the case. I knew from other students that they hadn't particularly enjoyed Shakespeare at GCSE, and they were nervous about approaching another text now at sixth form. And I also felt that, as I said, it would be good to use the video resources that were online. So what I've done is I've tried to simplify the task a lot. And within the IB framework, we're asked to use various areas of exploration. So I've put the Hamlet text within, it's not exactly a unit, but I've paired it with Beloved as another ghost story.
Okay.
And it was an idea that came to me when we were studying Beloved, actually, not with Hamlet, but when a student years ago said, "Oh, this is like the ghost in Hamlet," and also Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. And I thought, gosh, well, if students are able to make those connections, then, you know, it'd be fun to create a kind of unit on the supernatural. And so although the IB doesn't want us teaching in units as such, I've used this within their area of exploration that they call time and space, and to think about how different writers and different periods and cultures have addressed ideas of the supernatural in their text. So when I said that we're going to be reading 2 ghost stories, the students were quite interested in that. And that's really how we've approached it. So we've got a big focus on the ghost and Hamlet's encounters with the ghost throughout the play. We're doing an act a week, which is terrifying. We have 3 hours in which to teach the text each week. And what I've done is I've allowed the students to devote the first 2 hours of the morning to prep. And they can do that prep at any time. It doesn't have to be in the morning. But the preparation for the discussion involves reading a PowerPoint that I send out in advance, which is highly selective. Okay. I've used frames from the animated tale, the BBC animated tale, which I asked them to watch a section of for each week's discussion. And each PowerPoint, you know, has a kind of synopsis element to it, and some key quotations and questions that I want to raise during the discussion. And I also copy and paste in the parallel text sections from No Fear, Hamlet. Yeah. So this was my way of addressing the language issue, and it means the students have a gloss right there on the screen. And I've also encouraged them to read the text in parallel for themselves. So they have all of that to go through in advance of the discussion. And I do ask them also to look at the BBC iPlayer Culture in Quarantine, to watch the RSC 2016 production with Papa Asuedo, which I think was absolutely brilliant. And I think the way that he performs the role is so intelligent and very moving. And although it is fast-paced, I think the students are finding it very interesting. So a few of them did say to me at first that they couldn't follow it, and that's why I went to the animated tale, just to give them an overview. And I also recommended other great versions, like the David Tennant and the Kenneth Branagh, the Mel Gibson even, you know, if they wanted to supplement their knowledge. But I think at the moment they're quite happy now with using the animated tale and the RSC version. And I think they're quite intrigued by the African setting of the RSC production. So it's going quite well, and they're managing to engage, and the discussions have got a lot better. But one thing we did do with the discussions was to divide the group of 18 students into 2 groups so that we could have smaller discussions, because we realized that several were feeling quite inhibited from joining in. So that's also made a big difference, and they sound happier.
Well, it sounds like you're doing an amazing job, but it does sound like a lot of work. How does the amount of work that it's taken to create these resources compare with how you know, the amount of preparation you do for a normal class?
Yes, I mean, that's a good question. It does take at least a couple of hours to put the PowerPoint together. I also watch the footage so that I can have that fresh in my mind. And it's nice to do that, because often the students are noticing the dramatic decisions that actors and directors have taken, and they'll mention a little gesture, and you think, oh yes, you know, they've really understood that, and it's then something we can bring into the discussion, and you know, we can actually talk about those interpretive choices as well.
And that's one of the things I think I found at Royal Holloway is over the last 5 years, there is a real shift in people's comfort levels in talking about those kind of decisions, and performance as a form of interpretation, which I think, you know, until then there was a sense that it was, you know, the text mattered most, and then the critical writing on it, and then performance was somewhere down the line, as it were. Whereas it feels like performance has become much more engaging for the students, but also more available, as you say. So that's, and there's lots of things that they can explore beyond the classroom if they're really interested.
Yes.
So there are some benefits to working in this way. Do you
Yes,
think?
I think so. I think it's been fun. I think it's been more kinesthetic, if you like. You know, there's a great variety of the resources that they can have access to. And the fact that I, as a teacher, I'm really depending on them in order to do this has forced me to make more use of them. And I'm actually delighted to do that.
And they have responded well.
They have responded well. One thing, when you asked earlier about adapting the resources, one thing I've just learned to do on Teams, and so you can see how basic my skills are with the IT. But the students usually are several steps ahead, and they said, "Well, Miss, you can actually upload the PowerPoint into the Teams discussion." So I've been doing that, and it means we can have the screen there in front of us, and I talk them through it, and you know, I try and highlight particular words in quotations or within, you know, the passage that I've quoted, and that's really helped focus the discussion as well. And
I think that's one of the things that quite often students don't recognize, is that a class can be very structured, but if they don't see evidence of it, then they don't really recognize it. And I think that one of the things that not having their teachers is doing is giving a, well, and perhaps even a contrast between their teachers' approach and their parents' approach to learning, that a trained teacher has certain skills, and one of them is how to structure a lesson and how to develop learning. So I guess that's one of the things I think that I've taken out of, well, you know, I haven't done a huge amount myself of online teaching, but digital resources for me always seemed a way of engaging the students' learning in a way that wasn't just textual. And I think that there are key advantages to doing that. But I'm also aware that there are lots of barriers to learning that this technology sets up. Have you felt that there are some people who are kind of, I don't know, moving forward more quickly than you might have anticipated, and other people who are sort of falling back? What are the disadvantages, I guess?
Yes. Oh, that's very intuitive on your part. I mean, I've just had conversations today with students where they've told me how they never expected to enjoy Shakespeare so much, and you know, it's now their favorite read of the year. Another student who said she talked for an hour and a half with a friend who has studied Hamlet at A level when they met up yesterday, and you know, that's just delightful to hear about. But it is true that, you know, others have found it, and as I mentioned, going to the smaller group discussion, I think, has helped to bring students in who felt they were struggling, and you know, the simplified versions like the animated tale, you know, have really helped to bring them back on board. And I think that, you know, all the students are really capable of finding some way into the text. So it's just about trying to keep up the communication. And so the problem isn't just Shakespeare, it is remote learning, and the fact that this has been very hard for some students, you know, just to keep up the level of motivation and contact with teachers. So a lot of my work is spent just trying to contact people and bring them into the discussion. One thing that we have used, which I think really helps, especially when technology fails, is the chat function on Teams.
Okay.
So often, you know, students will say, "Oh, my microphone isn't working anymore, but I'm still here," and they'll type something in the chat, and then we can use the chat to supplement the discussion, to bring in the questions that some students are asking but aren't able to vocalize.
And I think that that's one of the things that's really important. And again, why I like using performance is that obviously there's students who are very verbal, and there's students who are better, you know, given a keyboard. And so to be able to have both those things going on at the same time. And then you also have a record of it, which is another thing that's interesting. Do you actually record the discussions for them to watch again, or?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And I think that's the other thing that people haven't taken into account. I mean, it's very anxiety inducing, I think, as a teacher, being every word that you say in a class being recorded. But what I hadn't anticipated when we started recording lectures at Royal Holloway is, particularly for visiting students, I was going far too quickly. And so for them to be able to revise and hear it again and hear it again and hear it again, they were able to really get the benefit of it. And I think that sometimes as teachers, we think that maybe the students who are not engaging are not listening, but they're just not listening fast enough, and they needed another chance to go over it again. So yeah.
Yeah, I do record the sessions, especially if a student has to miss the discussion for any reason. And in fact, with doing the parallel discussions, it's nice to be able to hear what the other group have said. And both I and my colleague are writing up quick summaries, to take forward to the next week. So yeah, it's quite a dynamic process, and it's recursive as well. But all the facilities are there to be able to go back, and as you say, you can actually see the chat, and that can be really useful.
And also, I think that the peer-to-peer learning that you're talking about is something that, again, I think often as a teacher, you don't necessarily understand all of the circumstances that the students are dealing with. And one of the circumstances they're dealing with is constantly being in this kind of media frenzy, that they're being watched, being analyzed, and it's actually the subject of Hamlet. So it's kind of nice to be able to talk about that while you're using the technology that is, can be intrusive. So you're involving people's home environments as well, which again, I think often as a teacher, you try to set aside that kind of, what you leave it at the doorstep, whereas now it's very much part of the discussion, I imagine.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that, and I might bring that into our discussion next week.
Okay.
I think on the whole, students, unless we're doing a one-to-one meeting, I think students prefer not to have the video working.
Okay.
And sometimes with Teams, the sound quality is poor if everyone has their mic on. So the students actually are really adept at just switching off their microphone and then back on again when they want to say something. So I mean, as I said, they're very good with the technology, really, better than I am.
And I think that's the interesting thing, is that it does, as I say, it flips the classroom in terms of authority. They're the ones who are, maybe helping you with certain aspects, but also helping each other. And so it does become a group learning, as you say.
Yes.
One of the questions I guess I have, though, is you taught these students before lockdown. Is that not right?
Yes.
And so that sense of community has already been established in the classroom.
Yeah.
So how do you think it's going to work in a new year if you're doing online teaching with students that haven't necessarily seen each other? Do you think it would work?
I think it would work, but it's an interesting question because I've never taught online before. So I've never done any sort of distance learning. And I think that it would be possible to establish a community online. I feel quite encouraged from this experience. I've actually really enjoyed it, which I didn't expect at the beginning. And I think I and several teachers were quite nervous about the idea that we might have to film our own lessons and then post them for the students. And what I am missing about the classroom environment is that sense of dynamic conversation between peers within the class and also with the teacher, but not just teacher student, but just really to have a sense of discussion. And I've been really pleased that that has been possible to achieve online. I think that there's still work to be done because I think the students are all patiently waiting to hear what I will say, and then they'll wait, make sure they're not going to interrupt anyone else. So it's a bit stilted sometimes, but I think everyone is feeling involved, even if they choose just to listen. And so I think that starting with a group of people that you've not met before, I think it would be possible to create a sense of community, but there might need to be additional things that happen on the side, maybe the one-on-ones, maybe creating pairings of students who could have their own breakout groups, so that there was also another venue where they could meet each other and talk more informally. And so that question they had.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess that so what just got a couple more questions, and one is, what will you take forward if you are able to teach back in the live classroom? Will you bring any of those materials with you? Will you bring any of that experience with you? What have you learned?
I think I'll bring all of it. I mean, I've always used video, the DVDs in teaching Shakespeare, and in fact, any text. I mean, I just think that if there's film footage available, it immediately engages the students. So I do try to use it in my teaching. But I think that the online discussion aspect has been really interesting. And, you know, there may be ways of trying to use, well, certainly to use this flipped classroom arrangement where, you know, I'm asking students to prepare for the discussion. I'd really like to retain that, because I think in general, students are reluctant to come to class with a lot of preparation. It's typically just been, you know, those who really feel confident with the work who come prepared. So often, you know, a classroom will depend on engaging the students on the spot and, you know, leading them through the work and showing them. But I think that students are recognizing now that with the online learning, they really have to have done some preparation, otherwise they'll just feel lost. So I have tried to differentiate it, if you like, by offering these different levels of access through the animated tale, through the BBC recordings, that, you know, they need to enter it at their own level, but they need to have done something in order to participate. So I think it would be great to try and retain this idea that that, you know, each student has a responsibility to come to class having prepared something so that they can join in.
And that would be phenomenally useful when they come to university, because it really does take us the first term to get them to understand that it's not, you know, they aren't there as empty receptacles waiting for us to fill them. They have to come with something to raise the discussion level. So yes, if they came in with that as an assumption, that would be so much more you know, engaging for the lecturers, but also for the other students. I think, you know, to have people who raise the game each week, really, you know, that's what university teaching is all about. So yes, I think it's, you know, I mean, weirdly, it sounds like these students might actually be as prepared, if not more prepared, for their university career than had you carried on, you know, in other circumstances. So I have one last question, which is, if you had to give advice to somebody who'd never done this and was about to start, as it sounds like you were, what would be your first or main tip, I guess? What would be your advice to someone starting out?
I think just to embrace what's available in terms of technology, however basic it is, and not be afraid of it, because you know, I didn't think at first that I would want to run lessons on Teams. But I think actually starting with what was more familiar to me, using PowerPoints, and then just trying out that record function, I think that really opened out things for me as well as a teacher. So I think the advice is, you don't have to do everything, you know, the all singing and dancing, you know, very professional recordings that we are seeing online. But, you know, start with the things that you feel comfortable with, and then just keep exploring and extending how you're using the technology.
Oh, great. I think that's what I'm trying to get across to people generally, is that you are the resource. You know, the technology is just the thing standing between you and the students. And if you can minimize it as much as possible, then yeah, it's the personal contact that you're interested in and trying to get people engaged in. So that's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. And it does sound like it's been a good experience for you so far. And I hope that it continues to be so.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christy.